Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, should I say. Right, first preview stroke prediction for this week. I've got Nick Ball and the Vargas one to do. That'll come later. I want to focus on the sort of, this is almost a double header in it, because there's much excitement and anticipation surrounding Zhilei Zhang, Joseph Parker, as there is Joshua and Ngannou. When looking at Zhilei Zhang, Joseph Parker, first off, there's a lot of sort of nuanced opinion, especially with me on this. I mean, a lot of people base their opinions of Zhilei Zhang on the two Joyce fights and the Hrgovic fights. Now, is it unfair to say I believe those two opponents flattered Zhang to a degree, in my opinion? Because when I look at, and I won't go over this again, but you know what I thought of Joe Joyce. He's a lovely fella, he's a great guy, but I do think he had very obvious limitations. And I think the same of Hrgovic too. So when looking at this, first off, you can only beat who's put in front of you. And, I don't think there was a clear winner in the Hrgovic-Zhang fight. A lot of people think Zhang did enough to win, and certainly for the first half he did. But Zhang has a very obvious problem with his cardio and his engine. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that didn't show itself against Joe Joyce. But with Joe Joyce, what you've got to remember is you've got someone who's very big, very slow of foot, and very slow of hand. So in terms of your engine and your pacing over the distance, it's not the same as it is against, say, of Hrgovic. When Hrgovic decided to switch on and push Zhang, Zhang's limitations in the engine department were there for all to see. They weren't obvious to see against Joyce because Joyce doesn't really move at a fast pace. He doesn't punch with speed and he doesn't box at a fast pace, So, like I say, you can draw many a conclusion from those two fights. Now, when we go to Joseph Parker, and again, like a lot of people, when I say this, a lot of people think this is me trying to detract from Joseph Parker, and it's not. Because I really like Joseph Parker. Again, he's a great guy, a lot of time for him, and he's a really good fighter. But when I look at the Deontay Wilder fight, all I can go on is what I saw. And again, this is not detracting anything from Joseph Parker. But that fight for Joseph Parker, for me, if you look at all his elite level fights, that was one of his easiest. I've said with Parker before, and when I've seen Parker fight taller guys, longer guys, he has sort of struggles with bridging the distance gap, bridging the length gap between the taller, longer guy. And it kind of makes his attacks a little bit crude and a little bit unscientific. He doesn't work his way in through any great thought, any great skill. He rushes to a degree. He rushes in. And he did that against Deontay Wilder. But he was allowed to get away with it because Deontay Wilder didn't deter him anyway. I said in my preview to that fight that one of the problems that Parker would have would be bridging that distance and getting close enough to land his own shots. Now, Deontay Wilder didn't deter him in any way. He never used a jab. He didn't really throw the right hand with any regularity to pose Joseph Parker any problems. And in which doing so, Joseph Parker essentially towards the end of the fight, because for the first half of the fight, Joseph Parker didn't do a great deal at all. He didn't have to because Deontay Wilder did virtually nothing. But certainly towards the end of the fight, when he pressed it a little bit more and did go and land his own big shots, he really just rushed in. There wasn't really any big thought. And a lot of he would rush in and throw the lead right hand. It was kind of a looping over the top shot. It wasn't really that correct in any way. So there was nothing really anything scientific or skillful that Joe Parker had to do or did do. So looking at this fight, to me, you've got two very obvious differences. You've got Joe Parker, who's got, now when it comes to hand speed, Joe Parker, it's one of Joe Parker's assets is his hand speed. But with Zhilei Zhang being a big man, he's almost got equal hand speed. Throws his shots differently, but is quick nonetheless. So they've both got really good hand speed. Now, Joseph Parker's got better foot speed. His foot movement is better. Zhilei Zhang is kind of quite rooted. He's a big guy. What do you expect? You don't get very big, very fleet-footed big guys, other than Tyson Fury for a heavyweight. It's very rare because it's quite hard to do. So for me, when I look at this, the keys to victory for both, for Zhang, it's landing his big shot. I don't believe he's going to outspeed or even outbox Parker. I think Parker can negate Zhang's boxing ability with his speed of foot and his speed of movement. So key to victory for me is Zhang landing a big shot. The big shot, which we know he's got, he put Joe Joyce to sleep and stopped him in the previous fight. But he couldn't put Hrgovic away, could he? Even though and did he really hurt Hrgovic that much at all? But I don't doubt Zhang's punch power. And Joseph Parker has been hurt and been stopped by Joe Joyce, should we say? Did I say Joseph Parker? But Joseph Parker has been stopped. For me, there's quite an obvious route to victory for Joseph Parker. It's the Joes. Get the Joes mixed up. Joseph Parker, for me, now, if you look at Arthur Beterbiev does this really well. Arthur Beterbiev makes all his opponents expend energy, physical and mental, even when he's not punching. And he does that by always giving them different looks and presenting different angles whilst not punching. And he does it the different angles. And he does that by the way he sets himself and the way he positions himself through clever footwork. Now, if Joseph Parker can do the same to Zhang, even when Joe Parker is not punching, if he can present different angles and different looks by his foot movement and the way he shapes up in the way he's going to use his feints, and they're a big thing. Constantly use the feints, engineer the feints to make your opponent guess. When you see fighters who will pour with a jab, and then when they go to throw the jab with intent, they will step in and snap the jab. That can be great in setting up a feint from that jab, because if you get your opponent to know that, right, when I pour, nothing's got to come of it. But when I shape up and throw that jab from the shoulder and step in and I snap it, I know there's a real jab coming. You can then feint that snappy jab and not land it. And you can get your opponent to guess and move and expend energy by doing that. If you can do that, if he can engineer Zhang enough with clever footwork and with clever feinting, and his speed of foot, if he can do that to get Zhang to expend enough energy, even when Joe Parker doesn't throw, and when you combine this with when he does throw, if he can use the jab, get in and out, stay away from Zhang's bomb, if Parker can take Zhang late into the fight, and he can get him to expend energy in the first half of the fight and into the second half of the fight, meaning that the tank will run dry, Joseph Parker can find opportunities late on. And if he can do that, and Loz D made this point, and it's about the movement, Joe Parker's movement. If he can use the movement well enough to A, stay out of the way of the bomb that Zhang throws, and B, keep Zhang guessing and make Zhang move, even get Zhang to follow him around the ring, even be defensive, even Parker getting on the back foot, make Zhang follow you, make Zhang look to force and find that knockout shot. And in doing so, he'll expend energy, he'll use his legs, he'll do the distance around the ring. Joseph Parker's got far better stamina. He's proved that. If Joseph Parker can not get hit too much and stay out of the way and cleverly use the feint, cleverly use the jab, cleverly use his feet and make Zhang expel that energy, even when Parker's not throwing punches, this will save Parker energy for the later half of the fight, and it will take energy away from Zhang for the second half of the fight. And that will win Parker the fight. And he can even force a late stoppage. But he can certainly, if he can stay out of the way and not let Zhang clock up rounds early, he can certainly bag the majority of the rounds in the second half of the fight. And that would be the key to victory for Joe Parker, for me. The problem is the jeopardy that Zhang poses with his bombs, because he can bang. He's an enormous guy. And if he can stay out of the way of that. Now, Joe's just got to show, discipline. He's got to show discipline, not get enticed to get involved early or get involved in any degree, because that's going to be a nightmare for Parker, because you don't want to get hit with that Zhang hammer, do you? But with Andy Lee in his corner, you would expect the discipline to be there. You would expect Andy Lee to keep him on track. And I think Joe Parker is a very disciplined guy when it comes to fight plans anyway. So for me, there seems more avenues for victory for Joe Parker than there does for Zhang. Does that mean I expect Joe Parker to win? God, No, this is why this fight is so enticing and so interesting. Although for me, there's a clear plan for Joe to stick to allow him to take victory. Doesn't mean it's going to work out that way. Zhang is no mug, is he? So certainly leading Zhang into the into the deep water is not going to be easy. And will Zhang fall for that? Zhang and his team are not going to be daft enough to not realise this will be Joe Parker's game. But again, that to me is the key for me. It all lies with the way Joe Parker goes about this. Who do I think will going to win? Tough one. Let's not forget, although Joe Parker's young, Joe Parker's had some hard fights, and he's been beaten by Joe Joyce. He's been beaten by Anthony Joshua. And I know people will remark on how the referee stopped Joe Parker, fighting his fight. I don't think that was as much as an impact a lot of people say. I don't think that was. I don't see the referee in the Joshua Parker fight as much as the referee was the deciding factor. Not at all. I think he was comfortably beaten by Joshua. Competitive fight, but quite a comfortable win for Joshua. And whatever you say about the referee, it's then down to the fight to overcome that. So, Joseph Parker is beatable. He's been beaten. We've seen he was comfortably beaten by Joshua, wasn't he? And although he had successes and it was a great fight against Joe Joyce, at the end of the day, Joe Joyce beat him up, didn't he? He was a mess after that fight. So that was a taxing fight in itself. So who have I got? I honestly don't know. But, I'll be accused of sitting on the fence, won't I? If Joe Parker can employ his tactics to the full extent and they can be successful, I take Joe Parker, all right? But, closely, I say 60-40. But there you have it. Joe Parker, 60-40. And if Joe Parker wins, I believe he wins it fairly convincingly or fairly wide, because to do so, he's got to take rounds off him, and he's got to take rounds off him clearly. But certainly in the second half of the fight, if he takes away Zhang's engine and the problems with his engine and the problems with his cardiovascular output and the problems Zhang has over the distance, certainly the younger, fresher Parker can make his attributes tell and make his advantages tell. So that'll be it. That's for that. I slimly go with Parker if he employs the tactics I believe he needs to employ to win the fight. Anyway, that's it. I'm out. I'll see you all soon.